Hi, it's Amy Shaw here today. It is August 26th, 2017, and I'm actually coming to you from my library today. And Hurricane Harvey is sitting in the greater Austin area, and so the outer bands of it are sitting right above us. Rolled in last night, a pretty torrential rainpour that we've been having on and off for about 18 hours now. So what better time to be sitting here making a video, right? If you've been following me at all, particularly with my ankle injury, then you know the last couple of videos that I've uploaded have been from my couch. Monday was 7 weeks of healing for me since I broke my ankle, and today's Saturday, so I'm coming up on 8 weeks pretty quick. Last week I did have my follow-up with my orthopedic and got x-rayed, and the bones are healing, but they're not completely knit up yet. The tibia, the larger bone, the fractures in that are looking better. I actually had 2 fractures in that. Are looking better. Those are knitting up a lot better than the fibula, the smaller bone that's sort of external on the outside of the leg. That has a nasty fracture still in it. So, but I have been bearing weight. I've been walking on my leg completely unassisted. When I'm in my house, I don't wear the boot at all. I've actually driven a couple times this week, but I'm still spending a lot of time actually on the couch with my foot elevated because it doesn't take very much for it to swell up. And I had some pretty significant life-threatening complications actually, which have delayed my healing as well. But I'm able to come to you from my library today, so I'm excited about that. You know, much more mobile and trying to get my life back on track. So what I really wanted to talk about today is shamanism. Again, I mean, that's kind of the topic. It's my channel. But specifically what a shaman is and what a shaman isn't. And usually I pick the topics that I'm going to talk about just based on the feedback that I'm getting a lot of times out in the community, or emails people are sending me with questions, or just in conversation with people. Ideas sort of come up, even on Facebook. If I see things come across my feed and it gets me sort of churning and thinking, and then it turns into a topic for a video. So the reason this is a relevant topic is I've been doing the metaphysical fairs for a few months now. Around the area here where I'm at, and I'm finding many times as people come up to me and they don't know what a shaman is. So they're either asking me what a shaman is, or they're already coming with a preconceived idea, which a lot of times I'm finding is, you know, sort of a false stereotype of what a shaman is. The most common misconception that I get is that when someone says I'm a shaman or shamanic practitioner, whichever, you know, makes it more comfortable for you, people will automatically assume that means like indigenous Native American. They automatically think of, you know, the chief with the big headdress and the eagle feathers and all of this type of thing. And there definitely is some shamanic elements in indigenous Native American spirituality. We do get a lot of practices from that. You know, they do the animal dances and the soul dances and, you know, the drumming and, you know, this type of thing. But in actuality, the Native American culture, and I'm going to take a real quick detour to talk about that just for a second. A lot of people, when they say Native American, they automatically clump like all Native American indigenous culture into one term of Native American. In actuality, there isn't any one single culture. It's many different tribes. Each tribe has its own language, its own customs, its own dress, even sometimes, you know, its own cosmology or spiritual practice. They definitely have their own ancestral wisdom, their own mythos and things, and so they're very unique cultures. It's really a disservice to them to clump it all together and call them Native American. and to just assume from a stereotype point of view that it's all the same. It's not. It's very, very different. But that's a common misconception that people have when, you know, I say I'm a shaman. They'll automatically think, oh, Native American, and, you know, they think powwow and they think all these things. And it's not that those things are inaccurate, but in actuality, in Native American indigenous culture, they didn't always have a role of shaman or a title of shaman in the culture. A lot of times people confuse medicine man or medicine woman with shaman. What a medicine man is and how that is different than shaman is that typically the medicine man or medicine woman was very, very adept at the local herbs and plants and medicines to use for people's, you know, physical ailments. So there may be some spiritual elements to that, but by and large, the medicine man or medicine woman was a herbalist, you know, a medicinal practitioner for that time. And there may have been some spiritual things that they were doing, but it was sort of woven into the fabric of their culture, and it was a very shamanistic culture overall in general, so everybody was expressing that sort of earth-based, indigenous, archaic, religious expression, and there wasn't necessarily a particular role of shaman in certain Native American cultures. A lot of those roles were sort of reserved for the chief. You know, when we think about, you know, the sweat lodges, I mean, those weren't necessarily led by a shaman. You think about, you know, the peace pipe being passed, the sacred tobacco, you know, being passed. A lot of times that was facilitated by the chiefs of the tribe, not necessarily the shaman. So it's a really common misperception, and then people want to know what exactly is a shaman. Well, it's really hard to articulate. It's not something that I have personally been able to quite narrow down to an elevator pitch quite yet, but I got out my Shamanic archetype workbook, and I've talked about it before. I've been a student at this School for Modern Soul Science, and this is my constellation of my shamanic archetype. If you have any kind of interest in shamanism and want to know more, I really strongly encourage you, once again, to visit the School of Modern Soul Science. Andrew Camargo is the one who has sort of formulated the archetype into 25 facets, and I got my thing out. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of them. I'm not going to go through all 25. And I found it really helpful. So if you're interested in that at all, right now, Andrew's actually doing daily live Facebook recordings where he's giving little lectures on going through the facets, doing 2 or 3 a day, talking about them. If you missed the live, then you know, the videos are there on the Facebook page for the School of Modern Soul Science. So check it out, or go to their website, check it out, see if you can download the Shamanic Archetype Workbook and just look at it yourself. But the reason I wanted to talk about it, because I have found that the archetype, as it's presented through the School of Modern Soul Science, is pretty thorough, and I think it does a really good job at capturing the sort of complexity, the complex nature of the shamanic archetype and what the shaman is. So just to give you a brief look again, this is my constellation, which I, you know, personally drew out and put together, and so you can see it's an interaction of many different facets that are sort of melded together and overlapping, and some of them form the other facets, some of them support the other facets, and so it's very complex, you know, actually sort of construct. But I want to go through this really quick, okay, just to give you an idea of what a shaman is. Number one on the shamanic archetype facet, out of the 25 facets from the workbook, is twice born, one who has been initiated. This is a born again experience, an experience of, you know, radically shifting and ego death and rebirth. It's called twice born. This is central to every single shamanic archetype expression, and it's cross-culturally. It's every single shaman that ever was and ever will be. Basically, this is the central core facet that holds all the other ones together, the twice born facet, which signifies truly the shamanic initiation. Now, this could be, you know, surrounded by the 24 other facets in a whole variety of constellations and arrangements. And so truly every shaman is unique, and that's why I think it is really difficult to put it into a box and give somebody, a 1 or 2 sentence answer on what a shaman is, or even my own personal expression of what it is, because it's complicated. The number 2 thing on the list is psychopomp, or guide of souls. Now, this is an interesting thing, and although, Andrew says that, you can have certain ones of these and not others, and I certainly do not have all 25, I found just in my experience, and I don't know, maybe it's, my location where I'm at geographically, maybe it's the particular group of people, that I'm resonating with, but I have found that I have yet to meet a shaman or somebody who calls himself a shaman or a shamanic practitioner that isn't engaging in psychopomp work. So for me, this feels pretty central to the shamanic role. The guide of souls. So psychopomp work involves some amount of mediumship. It's sort of the bridge between, the two realms. So anyway, what the psychopomp is basically like the bridge between the two worlds, our 3D, 4D reality here that we're seeing with our 5 senses, and then the spiritual realms or the non-ordinary reality. So the psychopomp is actually going back and forth in between the worlds, acting as a bridge and helping souls. So typically in psychopomp work, you're helping people who are transitioning. Either they're leaving their bodies, these incarnations, and going into the spiritual realm into death, or they're coming in, they're being born as infants, coming into this world. And so it's a time of transition, and that typically is what psychopomp work is. Now, obviously, that involves some amount of mediumship. I mean, if somebody's already departed and you're, able to go into the spiritual realm and make contact with them. Actually, number 13 on the list is clairvoyant, psychic, seer, remote viewer. So you can see how there's overlap here between that, the mediumship, and the psychic, seer, clairvoyant, aspects of shamanism. I think this is a really important distinction, though, because the shamanic path, to me, in my experience, is very distinct. When I go to these metaphysical fairs, there's people there, vendors of every sort of spiritual expression. So there'll be Reiki masters there, there's Theta healers there, there's people there that are doing essential oil therapies, there's massage therapists there, there's psychics there, there's people that are doing divination through tarot reading or, some type of reading, palm reading. There's a lady that reads the irises. So, there's a whole variety of practitioners and skills. There's, last time I went, I actually got a reading from a crystal whisperer. She reads people and determines, what crystals that they need to work with specifically and how they are to work with them. And so there's a whole variety of spiritual expressions, spiritual giftings, and to articulate how am I, as a shaman, different than the lady sitting across from me who might be a medium or might be a psychic, who might be doing divination, because I do all those things as well. It's tricky. It's a little bit tricky. And again, this is where I feel that the shamanic archetype here, as it's presented, really helps to understand the dynamic nature of the constellation of the shamanic archetype. So you might be asking, well, how is it really different? Well, I think that, when people go to have divination or they go to have psychic readings, they're looking for very specific information. And a lot of time the spiritual worker is providing this information in a very specific way. I feel the difference between, just say a regular medium, a regular psychic, and a shaman is that shamans are very adept at soul reading. And so they're very interested in connecting with the soul of the person. And so, and there's a healing element to it. All information is brought through or shared for the sole purpose of decreasing pain and suffering, to provide healing. And so a medium, just a straight medium, just say like a pop culture version, which would be, like the Long Island medium, Teresa Caputo, right? She sort of gets messages from deceased loved ones. Usually they're people that people knew in this life, and she kind of transmits that message to people. And sometimes it does offer them healing. You know, maybe they had unresolved issues or conflicts in their relationship with that person, or, you know, the person died and they didn't get to say that one thing that they wanted to say, and that's haunting them now, or something like that. And so she can offer these words through this, you know, connection that actually brings healing and relief to people. But in her work, it isn't necessarily her intention to do that. It just sort of happens without her, you know, really knowing. She's just pulling the information back through and sharing it. I feel with shamanic practice, there is much more of an intention to bring healing. And so as a medium who does sometimes get information, you know, from the other side, I don't necessarily share that information directly. I mean, I'm very guarded with it, and I'm very mindful with it. And, you know, if I shared everything that came through all the time, oh, good Lord. I just don't do that. I don't do that. In my opinion, that tends to be what, you know, sort of separates out somebody who's mindful in their shamanic practice and, you know, somebody who is sort of committing sorcery. I've shared before when I talked about that, sorcery and what it is, my own experience with having gone to people who had psychic gifts, and you know, sort of the damage, the you know, what that actually caused to me. So I'm very mindful of that, and I think that is a fundamental difference really between shamanism and other spiritual expressions is, you know, the shaman truly is sort of a guardian of in between the realms, of the information that's coming through and how it's coming through. And, you know, another difference really is that shamans can go, whereas mediums tend to speak with recently deceased, you know, ancestors that people knew in this life. Shamans can go back even much further than that. And, you know, other people can go too. It's not just shamans that do this, but I think that shamans make an intentional practice to do that, to, you know, contact ancestors from several generations back that people in this life might not actually have had a relationship with or a memory of. You know, and it's always to gather information, to make offerings, to bring back information for the betterment of the whole, you know, everybody in the tribe. So there are some fundamental differences, and like I said, much more complexity, and a lot of these overlap. You know, like I said, 13 is clairvoyant, psychic, seer, remote viewer. Just because somebody is these things doesn't necessarily mean that they're shaman. You know, another one that I find personally tends to be pretty universal in a lot of shamanic expression is, let's see, the number 16, mystically connected to nature. I think that a lot of people that have the shamanic impulse also do experience the archaic impulse. And a lot of us have had incarnations before as shamans, and so we can identify with that village tribal life and that being more in harmony with nature and working with the spirits of nature, for sure. I know, you know, my good friend Patrick John Coleman, you know, is talking a lot about concrete shamanism. He's there in Chicago, Illinois. You know, Chicago's a very urban city. He's surrounded by a lot of man-made architecture. A lot of that's driven out the natural resource and the natural sort of wildlife. And so, you know, you walk down the street, you might not, you know, have as much experience as you would if you live in a more rural area. And so, you know, I know that there is some expression in this neo-shamanic movement for that, you know, this urban shamanism that's getting away a little bit from the being mystically connected to nature. But even in that, I would say that universally, when shamans work with spirits, a lot of the spirits that they work with are animal spirits, because regardless of where we live. We can live, I have animal spirits that aren't, indigenous to North America. They don't even exist. They've never existed here. For example, maybe somebody has bear medicine and they work with a bear spirit, but they may not have personally seen a bear in the wild or even in the zoo. So you don't necessarily have to have intimate experiences, in the 3D with animals to work with the animal spirits. So I think this mystically connected to nature actually transcends the 3D sort of experience and goes into the spiritual realm. And anybody that's, doing shamanic work has encountered spirit animals in the spiritual realms. Another one that I think makes shamanism unique compared to, other types of things. And again, it's interesting because divination is something that shamans also do, but they don't necessarily limit that only to tarot cards. I mean, it can be, or ruins, or, the more sort of typical way. I remember when we went to New Orleans several years ago, outside the church, there's like this quad area where people have tables set up. A lot of them actually read bones. So they shake them up and scatter them like dice, and then however they lay out, they read them, or in Asian cultures, sometimes they'll do tea leaf readings and things like that. So there's many different ways to do divination, and certainly shamans do not limit themselves to any one single way. So you could do rock reading, tree reading, cloud reading, all sorts of different things. So that again, that's another thing that shamans do besides the divination, besides the mediumship, besides, the psychic things connected to nature. Another one that's on here, and I briefly talked about that at the beginning, number 14, is energy worker. I think that this is really interesting. And, shamans will have specialties. So there are shamans who do herbal treatments, and that's their thing. They're herbalists, and they're also shamans. Andrew, because I've been a student of the School for Modern Soul Science, I've listened to the lectures. I've heard him mention several times in the lectures, he's talked about midwifery, and that's something I personally do connect with. And I'm not talking about like the midwives in the hospital, the midwives, who are sort of trained and compliant with the medical allopathic model. I'm talking about the real lay midwives, the ones that limit intervention, the ones that remain with the laboring woman throughout the entire labor and are actually providing a service. That is also it's psychopomp in a sense, because the midwife is also engaging in many of these different facets, the clairvoyancy. I mean, there's a intuitive aspect that has to come in when you're doing that type of midwifery. Just being able to hear the sounds that a woman is making as she's laboring really needs to clue the midwife into what's happening, where a woman is at the point of her labor. And so it is very similar to shamanism, but it's interesting because those things are not on here. Midwife's not on this list. Herbalist is not on this list. These are sort of specialties. And I feel energy worker is definitely one of those, because like I said, I can go to the metaphysical fairs and there could be someone sitting across from me who's actually a Reiki master and doing that type of energy work. And, interestingly, I am Reiki attuned, Reiki 1 and 2 attuned. It just wasn't something really when I got in to practice that resonated with me. I personally, and I'm not saying anything bad about anybody who has that path, because we all have our paths, but because I'm shaman and not really truly an energy worker in the purest sense, and I do work with energies, actually. I do a lot of chakra work, and I do a lot of reading of the body in that way. But I just don't do it the Reiki way, the way that I was taught. I found that way for myself personally to be very rigid and very limiting. And I just quickly found myself trying to get out of that box as I was doing the energy work. So again, what I'm getting at is that there's a lot of overlap. somebody can be an energy worker and they're not necessarily a shaman. So you can see just from the ones that I've shared with you, the interaction, the interrelation, and the complexity. To be a shaman, you have to really be adept at a lot of these things. Another 124 was traverses the world tree, bridges and mediates opposites. I think this is also something that makes shamanism distinct from other types of spiritual services. And, this goes back to the psychopomp, and it goes back to being the bridge. The world tree is sort of, the gateway. And, traversing it is really having the ability to go into the spiritual realms and come back, and having complete control in, that level of consciousness and in altering consciousness, having control of it. So I think that is something that does, make shamanism unique somewhat. And then the last one I really wanted to talk about is elder. Again, I think that, we in our Western culture, as I've said so many times before, we've really lost our lineage. And we've really persecuted shamans. We've really tamped that down, squashed it down, sort of rationalized it to death. We've gotten way far away from, the sort of magical thinking of more indigenous life, and, adopted a much more scientific, rational point of view. And so along with that, shamanism has really suffered. And so we don't have the elderhood sort of lineage that a lot of the indigenous cultures have. But a lot of us are out here sort of forging the way, struggling through on our own, and being taught directly by the spirits. And so we're, being raised up and going through all our difficulties and our trials and our tribulations, and really having to learn our lessons the hard way, without having that mentorship, without having that, preceptor apprentice relationship. But that is usually something that is pretty significant to shamanism, and it's something that I think defines it differently. Just the relationship, the elderhood mentor relationship is different than you have in other sort of spiritual practices, where people go and get certifications and they go to schools, and yes, they're learning things, but they're not having that very intimate one-on-one mentorship relationship that typifies usually the shamanic path. So again, I just want to really make it clear that in Andrew's conception of the shamanic archetype, there's 25 facets that he's identified and labeled, and no one person is likely going to embody all 25 of these. It's going to be some type of constellation of interaction between some core facets. And so that's going to make each person a little bit different. And I really like that in terms of modeling and sort of understanding what shamanism is and how shamans can be very different. And again, also, like I said, how they can actually specialize in certain things, whether that be midwifery or herbalism, or, certain types of energy work, or even aromatherapies. All different sorts of things. Entheogens, the use of entheogens, that definitely is on Andrew's list as, somebody who specializes in that. So there are specialties, and no two are going to be alike. The other thing I wanted to say really quick before I close this video is I wanted to talk about the importance of studying shamanism in other cultures. It isn't so much that, we're trying to appropriate other cultures, but as a shamanic practitioner, I just find it so important to understand other cultures and how the role of shamanism plays and is implemented in those cultures. If you're at all interested in that, I have a public Facebook page. It's Shamanic Services, so it's facebook.com/Shamanic Services. I try to share on there pretty regularly different aspects of shamanism from different cultural lenses that I've gleaned off the internet, articles, YouTube videos, and things like that. I think it's important. Even the costumery is so fascinating, and it's just so ornate, and to just consider that every little bead and bell and dangly that's hanging off of it is intentioned is just mind-boggling. It's inspiring, actually. I feel like it really does help me in my practice to connect more at my soul level to my expression of shamanism. But even more important than that, what I want to say is that a lot of people, and I know I kind of sound like a broken record because I talk about this a lot, it's because it's the biggest misconception that I have. Other than people thinking that shamans are automatically indigenous Native Americans running around having powwows, other than that, or thinking that all shamans are herbalists. The other huge misconception that is, to me, in my mind, it's a misconception, is that shamans are somehow special, or that they're elevated, or that they're, almost at this sort of like demigod status, that they're, ascended or evolved beings, and that, until you've reached this certain point, you can't call yourself a shaman. And it's a point that you're probably never actually going to ever attain in this incarnation. I think for myself, that's just a misconception. I mean, I've studied shamanism for years now, on my own, just reading books, experiencing other cultures, through the voices of other people, through the eyes of other people. And time again, it's astonishing to me how actually human shamans are. I just watched a show a couple weeks ago. What was it called? I think it was called The Angry God or something like that. I can't offhand think of the title, but I'll definitely share it in the video description for you if you're interested in. But it was about the Yanomama tribe, and I remember learning about them in anthropology, so, like 20 years ago. So that they actually weren't new to me. I remember reading about them and how they were warring and killing each other. But this movie was actually about, it kind of had a Christian perspective, but not really. It was just about the missionaries and how they came in and sort of changed the culture. But, the Yanomama tribes were warring for like generations, killing each other physically. They would physically be in combat, physically killing each other, and then the shamans from each tribe were warring in the spiritual realms. So they were actually, at that point in my mind, not really being shamans anymore, and they were crossing over into, the realm of sorcery, where they were actually using their spirit guides and their magic and, their abilities to kill the babies, the infants of the enemy tribes. And so they were doing this to each other, and sort of always in this competition of amassing the most, spirit helpers. And so just watching that and reconnecting, with the story of the Yanomamos, it just really, brought home to me that, shamans, even in these indigenous cultures that were untouched, that hadn't had the influence of colonialism or capitalism or, these rigid religious dogmas that sort of wiped their culture out, even before they got exposed to that, they were still, some of them, stuck in this very base humanistic, level of consciousness in how they were interacting with each other and warring with each other and killing each other. And, another movie that brought that home for me was The Embrace of the Serpent. That's another shamanic movie, also from the South American tribe. And again, in that whole movie, it sort of goes through the life of the shaman from being a young man to an elderly man. And, this is a man who was very embittered, and he definitely was subject to a lot of human emotions and seemed to at times lack control over himself and his emotions. And so they tainted his expression of shamanism and how he, was interacting with people. So, I mean, again, it just brings home to me that being a shaman is not necessarily like this, elevated status of this highly evolved being. I think that in our post-industrial Western culture that's been overly saturated with New Age spirituality and, this ego drive, this sort of narcissism and everything that we experience. I think that people have come to expect that if someone's using the title shaman, that it somehow means that they have done a significant amount of psycho-spiritual work and clearing themselves. And I must say that I feel that that's probably important. It probably is very important. We call that hollow bone, or ego death, being at that place where you're as clear as you can possibly be at any given moment before you jump in and do this work. Because otherwise, how do you really know? When you're going into the spiritual realm, how do you really know? How can you use your discernment to know the difference between spirits, to know what's my own projection, to know, am I interpreting this, or is it coming through clear? And that's always the objective of the shaman, is to just be a clear channel and to not be doing much interpretation at all, to just be that clear sort of conduit. And it does require a significant amount of psycho-spiritual work to clear that out, alchemical work. And so I do think that's important. But it drives home to me, though, just seeing in other cultures how shamans, are subject to really petty sort of grievances and emotional outbursts and this type of thing, that you don't have to be, this ascended Buddha to be a shaman. I think that that's a misnomer. And so when we keep perpetuating that to people, that, don't call yourself a shaman, don't call yourself a shaman, you're not there, you're not there, you're not there, you're not there. You may not actually ever attain that in this life. And so it's sort of more of that, message that you're not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough. And it just seems to be so pervasive in our culture now. And I think that it really disempowers people. It stops them from their true calling, from their true mission, because they always feel like, I haven't arrived, I haven't done enough work, I haven't arrived, and so you have to be cautionary about it. And I think this really is why the apprenticeship model, the elderhood model, is so imperative to the survival and thriving of shamanism. So if you think you're on a shamanic path, you're not sure, try to find yourself an elder for sure, because this is somebody that you're really going to want in your corner to sort of help you meter out all these things, to sort of slow you down when you need to slow down a little bit, and to sort of light the fire under your butt and get you motivated when, you're kind of stuck or stalling or allowing, insecurity or whatever to make you feel like you're not enough, or like you can't do the work. So yeah, that's my suggestion if you're on the path. And I just thought it was important to take the time to talk about these things and articulate it in my own mind. So thank you so much as always for watching. If you have questions or comments, as always, please leave them below the video and I will respond as soon as I can. If you're interested in shamanism in terms of different cultural expressions, check out my Facebook page. Again, that was Shamanic Services on Facebook. And you're free to follow me on there and get a hold of me through that means as well. And thanks again for watching. Have a great day.